Today we'll be covering the PACT Act. We have our wonderful speaker who will be with us today is one of WDVA's very own, Tucker Flood. He works up at our VA regional office and is our liaison between your Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs as well as the federal VA. We also have a guest appearance from our wonderful Veteran Services Administrator, Steve Gill, who, did you want to say a couple of things?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, my name is Paul Cruz. In case anybody was wondering, I'll be your moderator for today. As we go through the information, there'll be a lot of questions. We'll try to get to everybody's questions as soon as we can during the presentation. We ask that you keep it at a high level though. This is not a train-the-trainer veteran service officer class, so we will not be getting into true detail of how to do claims and things of that nature, but we just wanted to give everyone an overview of some of the significant changes due to the PACT Act. So sir, would you like to take it away?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. As Paul mentioned, my name is Steve Gill. I'm the Veteran Services Administrator with your Washington Department of Veterans Affairs, also a U.S. Army veteran, and despite this youthful appearance, I've worked for WDVA since 2001. So I've been around a few years. I've been a veteran service officer in my career. I've worked in homeless outreach and our fiduciary services. I've worked in rural parts of our state. I've worked in Seattle. I've done a lot of work with veterans over the years, and veteran service officers are really core to the services that we provide at the Washington Department of Veterans Affairs. Whether we're partnering with counties, with Indian tribes, with the nonprofit veteran service organizations, VSO work is critical to our mission. It's really a backbone, foundational service is what I call it. You guys heard our director earlier today when he was speaking talk about our strategic goal of increasing the percentage of veterans receiving VA disability benefits, trying to increase that percentage to stay on par or even beat that national average. Just for context, that national average is currently about 30%. So about 30% of veterans nationwide and in our state, it's a coincidence that we're also at 30% in our state, are receiving VA disability, either compensation or pension benefits. And that's about $3.6 billion with a B dollars in compensation and pension disability payments paid back to veterans and their families in our state. You guys know how important that is for making ends meet, paying the rent, food, utilities, quality of life. Those disability financial benefits are important, but just as important is the healthcare side. That you guys also know when a veteran is service connected, they become eligible for increased or improved VA healthcare benefits, especially for those service connected conditions. Might even be 100% and have that CHAMP VA. And then there's all the other stuff that comes with that. There's education benefits, veteran readiness and employment, formerly known as VOC Rehab. There's the survivors benefits. There can be employment benefits. There's so much that comes with that the second and third wave of benefits, even down to state parks passes and reductions on hunting and fishing licenses, right? There's a lot of stuff. So we see the service officer's role as foundational to that because they, beyond helping the veteran file for that initial disability claim, they can help the veteran understand and those other benefits, help them apply for other benefits. But as you also know, they're often a hub of knowledge and information in their community, whether it's housing resources or behavioral health resources, or food banks, or transportation assistance. VSOs kind of inherently become a resource for other types of resources, other needs that might be met, other barriers that might need to be addressed for the veteran and their family. And that's a lot of work, and it's deep work because veteran service officers are having some really tough conversations with veterans about their medical conditions, their family, their finances, their health, trauma that might have happened years ago, and then what they have to do next to get that claim filed and get it approved. Here in Washington State, since the PACT Act was passed in 2022, August of 22, the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act, we've had a 100% increase in the number of VA disability claims that our VSO network has been doing. That's the nonprofit veteran service organization, their service officers that we work with, state, county, and tribal service officers. We've doubled the amount of claims that our network has been doing in 2 years. The resources have increased, but the resources certainly have not doubled, right? So the legislature has made investments and the state legislature into VSO resources, funding more VSOs, increasing contracts to counties and nonprofits. There's a lot of work that's being done, but we know it's not enough. Like the one thing that we hear, no matter where we travel in the state, is that we need more VSOs. We've got that message and we want to continue hearing that message. But don't be afraid to talk to your legislators either, right? I mean, VSOs are publicly funded. Taxpayer money is valuable. I'm not out there trying to spend, too much of it. But we know that VSOs are in demand now more than ever. And I've been doing this work for a minute since I mentioned. I've been tracking this since 2009. In 2009, there was about 13 or 14% of veterans were receiving VA disability benefits, either compensation or pension. We're at 30% now. You heard me say that earlier. It's gone up every year consistently, and it's going to continue to go up for some time to come. The high water mark, we see some counties at around 46% of veterans in their counties receiving benefits. So we know that's possible. We see some counties that are poking around like 19-20%. All right, they got some work to do. And so we know that we need to get more VSOs out there to help veterans connect with these benefits. It would be wonderful if no one ever got hurt or got sick and veterans didn't need these disability benefits, but life happens, right? People get hurt in the military, they get sick. They're clumsy paratroopers like me and they get hurt jumping out of airplanes and car accidents and you name it. So when that's the case, veterans deserve these benefits and their families, especially survivors, deserve the benefits. So that's why we're talking about this. We are waiting for our guest from the VA regional office. The Seattle VA regional office is supposed to be the presenter today. They've supported this event every year. They've done a great job. We were going to ask them to give an update on the PACT Act and what they're seeing in terms of the volume of VA disability claims, the outreach work that they've been doing. Obviously, they're not here yet. So I'm going to stall a little bit, but we're not going to waste your time. Tucker Flood, as Paul mentioned, our VA Claims Quality Assurance Specialist, is our liaison to the VA regional office. He's also the hub of the wheel of all the VSO work we do in our state with the nonprofit veteran service organizations, with our county veteran service officer partners, with our tribal veteran service officer partners. So we're going to put Tucker on the spot. We gave him about 2 minutes to review the slides, and he's going to take you on a journey. But I want you guys to know that if our VA guest does come in, we might pause for a minute and introduce him and turn the mic back over. We do want you to get this material either way, so we're going to make the best use of the time. With that said, I'm going to sit down, shut up, and turn it over to Tucker. So thank you guys for being here.
Is it 30% of all veterans or 30% of all that you know qualified veterans?
30% of all veterans.
All veterans.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not worried about me.
By the way, he's the squeaky wheel, not just the wheel.
Like Steve said, my name is Tucker Flood. I work out of the Seattle VA regional office, so I end up working pretty hand in hand with the VA quite often. If you see me take breaks for water, it's because I need it, and also because I did have literally 2 minutes to look over the slides. Fortunately, at least, they are a good number of things that I deal with on a pretty regular basis, so we should have most of your questions covered. If the VA does come in, I will absolutely turn it over to them, though, so don't be surprised if I disappear in a heartbeat.
Yes, I lift the mic up.
Yeah, you can put it, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, I told you I'm 5'2".
No worries. All right, so let's see if we can get this up and rolling. So the VA regional office, for the record, the VBA is separate from the VHA. This is an important distinction for those that are not aware of how the VA organizes itself. The Healthcare Administration is separate from the Benefits Administration. This comes up a great deal in Veteran Service Officer work, and it comes up a great deal for benefits. This is important. Please remember it. There we are. So speaking of the VBA, you're now looking at my lovely concrete box of an office at the Jackson Federal Building in downtown 2nd Avenue, and yes, the commute is as much fun as it sounds. There is no free parking. I will warn anybody trying to attend right now. It will cost. That is a thing. If you drive a motorcycle, you get to be nice and lucky. They do have free motorcycle parking because apparently that's a thing. There's lots of public transit around, and that's cool. On the 10th floor is where all of the VSOs and the VSO organizations live, like myself, the VFW, the American Legion, all of the assorted ones. There's another group of the Raiders and such elsewhere in the building on the 11th floor, and then if you go down on the first floor, that's where the actual public contact office is. So anybody who's trying to get into and go to see the VA will go to the first floor of the building, and there immediately on the left, you'll find it. Important note, anybody attending and going into this building does have to go through a security check process. This is important to let people know. You have no idea the number of veterans that I have that come to our office and have not been told this. They're very upset to have to give up their knives. They're, for some reason, unexploded ammunition. I don't know why that's a big thing, but I've seen more veterans upset about having to give up the bullets that they've carried. I don't get it. Anyway, make sure that they know that, because it will come up. Everybody has to go through those security gates, and a lot of people are very uncomfortable with it. There's also a regional office in Spokane, right around here. I have not personally been to this one, but I know that a number of people in the room have, and have great relationships with people involved. Those of you that have, I recommend you speak out and check out with the people in here. You can find them from the Spokane office as they're milling around, and that's a great opportunity to network a little bit and do some talking and explore kind of the VASOs that work in the area. Chris Dorchis and his crew do a fantastic job, and I would really recommend talking with them about the relationships that they've built as far as that goes. And moving on, we've got the actual part of what the VBA does. And the VBA handles all the actual benefits, the benefit part of what the veterans process in this. The healthcare administration, of course, when it comes to taking care of the veterans directly, providing services, any direct service tends to be through the healthcare administration. So anytime that a veteran is looking for instance, actual assistance in their health, their caregiving, for instance, like aid and attendance. Aid and attendance is a benefit. We'll get into that at some point a little bit. But when they're talking about who is going to come and help them, or actually having someone come and help them, that's all healthcare. When we're looking at the VBA, the Veteran Benefits Administration, really what we're primarily talking about is compensation and pension, which includes the disability claims, non-service connected pensions, and then all the death benefits, which include the dependency and indemnity compensation, as well as the death pension, and in the same form, the accrued benefits that would be owed at that time. They also process the education benefits for the GI Bill, the vocational rehabilitation, home loan guarantees, life insurance, burial benefits, all of those processes. And that's all stuff that goes through the VBA. Do not ask the healthcare administration about it. They will not help you, and their forms will get lost. Sorry, that was my outside voice. A really important part of the process here, and especially when it gets into the VBA, is the service connection. And it applies for the VHA as well, but for VBA purposes, service connection is really the linchpin for a great deal of particularly compensation processes, compensation and disability. And that's really the idea that the issue at hand was related to your service. So just going off the slide here, clearly, an illness or injury that was caused or got worse because of your active military service. Now, important to keep in mind is that there's direct connection, as in you were harmed during your service. There's presumptive connection, as in a law has been passed that indicates that, hey, we already know that this causes this. That's a great deal of what the PACT Act covers, and we'll get into that when we talk about the PACT Act. There's aggravated service, as in we knew that you had this going into your service and it made it worse, which means it's still our fault. And there's secondary service, as in, hey, you had this, now it's because this occurred in the service, this issue of yours, now this connection or this issue that you have was made worse, occurred, got new, etc. that secondary connection is key, because especially for a lot of these PACT Act issues, a lot of the presumptive issues, a lot of issues that occur from service, down the road, secondary connection becomes very significant as more issues crop up from it. You must file a claim with Veteran Benefits Administration for service connection to be considered. This is critical. If you do not file, you cannot receive benefits. You are not eligible until you have filed for benefits. I cannot help you until that point. We cannot help you, the VBA cannot help you until you have done that. End statement. If it sounds like it's come up a lot, it's because it has. When you have service connection with a disability, the VA has to rate it somehow. They have to determine the degree to which it impacts your life. Per the slide, we assign you a disability rating based on the severity of your service-connected disability. We express this rating as a percentage rated on how much your disability decreases your overall health and ability to function. The purpose of this, from a VA standpoint, is to address ultimately how much your service-connected injury impacts your ability to function as a human being in society, but importantly and particularly, how much it impacts your ability to make a living wage. This is their primary form of consideration when they're looking at it. So when they're estimating this and when they're taking into account the various different issues that something causes you, the primary component of what this rating represents is ultimately what is the impact that it has on your ability to make a living on a daily basis. It's not a clear, anybody can say and can tell you that this isn't an exact science. When you walk in and when you file for a claim, or a veteran files for a claim, there is no way to estimate, to account for, to take full stock of the damage, the issues, the problems, the cause, the ultimate impact that your disability has had on your life. It's not possible. In the same way, there's no way that the VA can go back entirely and estimate how much pain and suffering that may or may not have cost you and then reimburse you for it. That's not what this is about. That's ultimately not what they can do. What they can do is try and assess, per their scheduler system, what that means and what impact that has on your life, and significantly, your ability to work. That's really what it boils down to, and that's what they're trying to replace and reassess. Now, if it sounds problematic because the amount of this disability works in different ways depending on where you are in the country, yeah, it is. Like I said, there's a number of different kinds of service connection, and we went through those a little bit in the last slide, but to break it down a little bit more specifically, in that direct service connection, again, there are three specific components that you need for any given claim. There's a current disability, an event that occurred in that service, and a link between the two, which was called a medical nexus. And that medical nexus is crucial. It's really, really important to address that medical nexus and to ensure that anything that's being filed or anybody that's looking to file a claim answers these three components for every issue that they're filing, because that is exactly what the VA is going to ask in order to service connect an issue. That medical nexus is one of those things where either the VA will try and provide it themselves in a C&P exam, or they will look for an opinion via your doctor, or occasionally one of their doctors. But remember how I said the VBA and the VHA don't talk to each other? They don't, unless you tell them to. So for instance, we often hear veterans go to the VHA and be told from their doctors, wow, sounds like this absolutely came from your service, you should file for that. That doesn't mean when you file for it that the VA actually knows that. It's not on record. It's not as though this is something that a connection occurs with. It just means that your doctor does have that opinion. Similarly, the fact that your doctor has said that does not mean that it is on record. It just means that they told you that. A nexus letter or a nexus statement is something else entirely, and that may well be part of the development of a claim, which we recommend as VSOs you get. Presumptive service connection, apologies. Again, that's part of the legal aspect of this, and that's what happens when you have a law or you have legislation that has already said, we know that Agent Orange causes diabetes. We know that. Please, we don't need additional medical evidence linking that. You already have it. You already have exposure to Agent Orange in your file. Done. Move on. The whole point of that is to expedite the process for everybody involved so that we don't have to go through the development of that. It is very specific, however, which of these issues is presumptive and which is not. It's not as though something auxiliary to a presumptive or close to a presumptive is presumptive. It has to be on the list. If a very specific type of cancer has been identified as being presumptive, it is that very specific type of cancer. It is not another type of cancer that happens to be in the same place, for example. So those presumptive lists can be very, very important and very significant to be aware of. And that's a great deal, again, of what the PACT Act expanded. Most people, it seems like, end up focusing at the moment on a lot of the PACT Act issues that came up for the Vietnam era. Ultimately, the PACT Act really expanded a lot of those presumptives for the burn pits, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that as things move forward. Again, aggravation is that piece where it's a pre-existing issue, and we don't see as much of that, but we do still see it, and it's something that we do want to consider, because many people, when they enter, and especially veterans who are taught to shut up and deal with it and move on, don't really consider the fact that, yes, they did have an issue when they went into the military, and yeah, it did get worse from all of the things that they did. That's still a problem. That's still something that you need to acknowledge and can be addressed by the VA. You just have to make sure that you're putting it that way. Because if they were trying to otherwise say that it was caused, it won't function. Similarly, secondary connection, once you have an issue, anything that stems from that issue is now connected. So the PACT Act, the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxins Act, PL 117168. Is, as we've discussed, that law that really expands a lot of the VA healthcare and benefits to veterans that are covered by a number of these presumptive issues, and particularly the burn pits and toxic substances. It really changed a lot about how the VA processes and engages with the toxic exposure across a number of different fields. It changed how they treat the toxic registry within their system, how from a VHA standpoint, they do their screenings and put up their flashes in their system, is what they would call it. From a VBA standpoint, it really reorganized a lot under how they address these issues and makes it much more directed towards the PACT Act issues and much more directed towards getting veterans flagged or documented as being a toxic exposed or TERA veteran. The radiation component is also in there. It's less common, but it is still a part of that act. So it expands eligibility both to the health care for veterans with toxic exposure and as well as the presumptive issues for the Vietnam era, Gulf War, and post 9/11 era. And it expands eligibility for benefits to those veterans that are exposed to those toxic substances as well. So if we're looking here, we can see a number of the different things that were added as far as presumptive conditions. Now remember, presumptive means there is a legally acknowledged connection between your exposure and these particular issues. So if you have these issues after having been exposed to it, you can always find these online. If you find that you have these issues and you can prove in your service that you had exposure, then congratulations, I suppose. You get your service connection. What this ultimately does is remove the need for a medical nexus. Remember how we talked about those three components of a claim? This is addressing the medical nexus. Presumption flat removes that. That is what a presumption is. I'm not really going to go through and read all of these out. I don't think that you're going to benefit from that one. If you want to look it up, you can. If we need to go back and talk about something specific, we certainly can. But ultimately, the list is widely available and available online, and it's certainly available right here. So PACT Act processing, this is the part where I am going to have to take a look at these because these are the specific pieces from the VBA as far as a lot of the processing that they have done. And it looks like part of it needs updating, but so from a completed claims standpoint, it looks like they've completed 25,304 claims in the Washington district. Looks like the average processing time is 164.8 days, which has gone up a little bit since last I checked. The claim grant rate for PACT Act claims is 77.1%. The granted claims are 19,505 of the above claims. There's still about 10,000 pending, and the net awards are $107.5 million. Yeah, it's pretty solid. As far as the rest of the stats go, I'm not going to sit here and read off all of these numbers to you. I will give you a second to take it in because I don't really want to deprive that of you, but I don't think anybody wants to have me sit here and read all of it off. I did want to give the VA credit for the work that they're doing on the PACT Act, however, because it is substantial. As Steve mentioned, the number of PACT Act claims that have come in is significant. It has really drastically changed and increased the landscape that has happened around veteran service work and around the claims that have been going in. It's also really increased, frankly, the outreach that has happened as part of that. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, but I've seen a great deal more energy and effort put into reaching out to veterans and getting veterans in to file claims, which is fantastic. It's really resulted in and helped build a much broader claims engagement from veterans, and I'm hoping that we can all see that and help build that momentum and continue it moving forward. We haven't really seen that drop off. We have seen it plateau a little bit. It hasn't really increased or continued to increase beyond what we would see from Gaines adding service officers along the way, but we are definitely seeing that it's not as though we all of a sudden are dropping off here. The momentum is still there and it's still working, which is wonderful.
Sir, I just have a quick question. That 107 million, is that like an annual amount, or what does that, like the total net award, what is that? Is that a yearly?
It's a good question. So typically when the VA has an award, there's two components of any given VA award, right? The first component is the back pay that would be addressed in that, and that's when you file the claim, and if the average time for a claim is 162 days, and the effective date of your claim is either when you've submitted an intent to file, so it would be up to a year prior to that, or it would be the date that you have filed your claim, so that 162 days, you're owed some money. So at base, you get X amount of back pay. Following that, you then have the award, which is a monthly grant that is awarded. I believe, and I can't say for certain, and I'm sorry for that, but I believe that when the VA processes their awards in this way, they handle it as the back pay plus the monthly grant. Again, please do not quote me on that since I'm not positive, but I believe that represents the back pay plus the monthly grant. That would typically be what we would consider an award from a given claim. So we've talked a lot about toxic exposure and what the PACT Act indicates as such, but we haven't really talked a lot about the specifics of what toxic exposure is and what qualifies for that. So veterans that qualify as toxic exposed veterans are veterans that have hit air pollutants, chemicals, radiation, warfare agents, or the occupational hazards that come as part of being on military bases or working in military service. Again, I'm not going to go through all the individual little specifics reading it off, but it's broader than most people think. And it's definitely something that I would highly recommend any veteran that you have worked with or are working with or has questions or concerns about this, particularly as you're looking at the PACT Act presumptive lists, I would highly recommend that what they do is go for a VHA PACT Act screening. What that does is go through their military service and help engage on that level to see through the VHA whether or not they have been exposed to any of this, and adds that into their file in the system, which makes it much, much easier for them to claim benefits in this process. It helps remove that question and means that that doesn't necessarily have to be done during the time of their claim and filing, which really helps speed things up, as I hope you can imagine. So one of the best things you can do is go ahead and preemptively get that screening and ask for that. But that's a VHA process. We hearing the issue? It doesn't come up if you don't also file VBA benefits.
So, thank you. Are you recommending that veterans get the screening even if they're not currently experiencing any disability or experiencing medical conditions, just to get it on the record that they've been exposed?
Very good question. Yes, personally I am. I think that it's a very good thing for veterans to go in, get a toxic exposure screening, because even if they don't currently have something, for instance, the Vietnam veterans are, many of them now or have after that developed a number of these issues, and having on file that they were toxic exposed. It used to be, can we verify your Vietnam service, for instance? Yes, no. Now it's, can we verify your toxic exposure? And having that on record is much, much simpler, both for the veteran and for the VA. I mean, I was going to say VSOs, but that's a little self-serving.
For veterans that aren't eligible for VA healthcare, what would we do in order to get them a PACT Act screening?
As far as veterans who aren't eligible for VA healthcare goes, it depends in some ways why. If their discharge is dishonorable, for instance, then we would need to take a look at that. Typically, the PACT Act expands VA healthcare eligibility to anyone who is covered by any of these issues. That's part of the PACT Act. And I apologize, I might have glossed over that. I should emphasize that part of the PACT Act expands VA healthcare coverage to anyone who was impacted by any of these exposures and has any of the presumptives that come from that, or of course the secondary or aggravated issues that come from that. So a toxic exposure evaluation should be, from my understanding, something they can come in and ask for regardless of that, because that is helping them qualify or determine whether they qualify for their health care. So that's part of the application process, or determining their eligibility process for VA health care. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Sorry, just making sure I'm not missing anybody. Got one more.
I just want to give, I'm a service officer in Skagit County, but the best thing you can do for your veterans right now is call the 1-800-827-1000 number and do an intent to file over the phone. Because I could tell you, all of us CVSOs that are in here right now, we're backed out 2 or 3 months of appointments because of the PACT Act. And if you want to get the max compensation for your veteran, instead of having them do the intent to file when you visit the vet, do it now. And I don't know if you guys have called the 1000 number lately, but they answer like that since January. I'm still not holding my breath yet, but I've been that guy that's been on there 30 minutes to an hour waiting, but now it's like that, they just answer.
So as the number of, they're really working on trying to make things accessible to veterans as well as in some ways the VSOs. Getting that intent to file in is crucial. It's definitely a really, really significant step for veterans. And one of the things that, particularly depending on where you're at, the availability of veteran service officers in your area is always an active concern. Some counties are very fortunate and they can roll things right through. Other counties really have much more limited resources and have their county veteran services aren't able to. Some counties don't have a veteran service officer through the county and rely on nonprofits. Some counties really don't have availability at all. So there are worse things than calling in or recommending that your veterans call in and get that intent to file in. It's one of the few forms that the VA can assist you with or log in over the phone for you. Most of them have to be done directly. Paul?
I took her.
How's it going?
Not to get too far into the weeds on this particular question, but in regards to the PACT Act and the expansion of VA healthcare for essentially all veterans, not just those of a certain war period. On the 1010 form, where it has all the toxic exposure to that, how does the VA process that for getting the application for VA healthcare? I mean, honestly, the majority of the veterans that served had some sort of a toxic exposure. And when they put that on the 1010, how does the VA critique that to find out if they're eligible for VA healthcare? Do you know?
That's a good question. From my understanding, at least, when they're rolling through that, they're doing a lot of pulling the STR records, they're doing a lot of pulling location records. A lot of the different, part of it is that it depends on which kind of confirmation you're doing. There's a very different process that goes in through the radiation verification, for instance, than it does for the burn pit verification, than it does through exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. So it's not a simple answer, I guess I would say. That said, it's primarily reviewing your service records and the locations that you served at, as well as the MOS that you had in the service. And what that entailed and those direct services that those entailed. There's more to it than that. It's not as cut and dry or not as quick as that. They have individual or specific teams that address each different component of it. That's the case. We do have a couple other things that I want to make sure that we get through just to honor the content that was presented. So I'll take one more question and then we'll handle the rest after that.
On the second slide, he had where it says like VA pension, and underneath it was non-service connected.
Yes.
Now, my understanding is if you're 65 and older, honorable discharge with campaign medal or served during the time, that you're able to. And I was wondering how much can they get?
So a non-service connected pension, for those that are unaware, is it's a needs-based benefit, not a service-connected based benefit. They specify that based on the income that you have and the assets that you have. So they will check to ensure that you qualify for it from an income and assets standpoint. And it's not much, I gotta say. I believe it's around $1,700 a month with a little bit more for aid and attendance and or dependents that can be added, but it's really not much. It's a very limited benefit. And that's the same for a survivor's pension in that regard. I'd have to take a look at the specific number, but I'm pretty sure it's around there. Okay, we got another couple questions then. One more question after this.
You talked about they look at your deployment records of where you've been. I was associated with the special operations community, and my deployment records put me in places I've never been in the world where I was actually in different places. So how would a person navigate that to say, I was in Iraq, I wasn't in Mississippi or wherever it was?
As far as I'm aware, and typically this is what I've run into with special forces in those kind of situations, they have their own methods of addressing that. It's not, when it goes in, I mean, you're not the first special forces guy who's gotten hurt and needs to file a claim. And it's not like they're gonna have a lot of people signing up if they don't take care of you on the flip side. So typically, when that happens, they have their own process to address those kinds of records. Because they understand, I mean, it's not, the VA isn't the DOD, but they do recognize that this is how it works, and that when you have your service treatment records as somebody in those positions, most of the time they process it through those channels. And there are times where they do make mistakes, where veterans are exposed in ways that your records and your records, your service doesn't show, and that's where service officers go to work because it's important, and we need to make sure that that's accounted for. I think that was it. We need to move on a little bit. So when or how should I file a claim? I'll be honest and say that this is the VA's presentation, so we're going to have a slight difference of opinion on this one, but you can file a claim in a number of different ways. You can apply online, which is a way. You can contact an accredited veteran service organization, which is a much better way. I would highly recommend that. And I would highly recommend that, and I would highly recommend making sure that you are working with an accredited veteran service officer. That is an important distinction and one worth noting. You can always mail your claim form to Janesville, and you can always fax your claim form, and you can apply in person. I really recommend as much as possible that you engage with a veteran service officer. There's a reason why we exist, and there's a reason why we get really a lot of time and energy over target trying to memorize a lot of these rules, laws, legislations, systems, processes, etc. It's not necessarily intuitive. I'm the first to say that I think half of our job is translating VA to human, and it's as difficult sometimes as it sounds, but it's also a really good way of making sure that things don't fall through the cracks and things don't get mixed. Not all veteran service officers are equal, and that's a shame, but we're certainly doing our best within the scope that we have to make sure that the quality is there and that you guys are represented and that we have what we need in order to make sure that that happens.
More human. Yeah, well said. Okay. You being nice.
So if you need to contact the Seattle regional office and the VBA directly, the best way of doing that is to schedule a VERA appointment as a veteran. These are appointments where you can online go ahead and pick a specific time. Note that this is directly with the VBA. It is not with a VSO. It is not with a VSO organization. It is with the VBA directly. So remember how I said we're up on the 10th floor and they're down on the 1st? You have no idea how many people I have that wander around aimlessly on the 10th floor saying they have an appointment and they do not. And how vice versa, how many people wander down on the 1st floor saying they have an appointment and they do not. It is with the VBA, so make sure that you know that and that veterans that you are working with know that and know the right place to go, because otherwise, if they're in Seattle, they'll end up talking to me because I'm one of the only people that answers the door if it's closed. You can also go online to the benefits at va.gov in Seattle, and you can take a look at their information. The VA silos things in their regional offices, and Seattle tends to handle the general area. I believe that the Spokane office also has an online presence, but I'm not positive on that one. I haven't seen as much of it. That would be another one that I would check with the Spokane guys about. And outside of that, the VBA national line, as Chris had mentioned earlier, is that 1-800-827-1000 line. That's the general public contact line, and that's the one that I would recommend veterans call for brief information, as well as to do things like file and intent to file. It is not a substitute for working with a VSO. It does not do the same thing, and it does not provide the same information. Please be aware of that. If you are working with a VSO, it will not replace contacting or engaging with your VSO. Please be aware of that. Outside of that, thank you for your service. There's a couple different things that you can do as far as the next steps go, and as far as engaging directly with the VA and being sure that you're aware and can move forward with things. You complete your personal health inventory. You can upgrade your My Healthy Vet account, since I know that that has changed recently and there's a couple different pieces of that. You can still log in to the old system and you will be able to for a little while, but it does give you the option. So that's a good thing to keep up with if you're able to. You can download the VA mobile app, which is great because it means that you can jump right in onto it and see things. Be aware that what you see on the VA mobile app is not necessarily clearly explained or put in terms that you as a veteran would know or make sense with, especially when it comes to claims processes. So it does not replace working with a VSO who can explain what any of this process means. But more information is better. Outside of that, you can get your Veterans Health ID card from the VHA, right? Not VBA. And you can browse the Veterans Health Library, which has a little bit more information about all of these issues and things that we've discussed. And outside of that, you can always make an appointment with the VA directly. They do want to talk to you. What the VA never wants you to hear is that they don't want to engage or talk with veterans. It's a very important point. They really are trying. They really are engaging. They really are reaching out and making efforts to do everything they can to assist and help veterans. They're not a partner, they're a crucial component and the source of the veteran benefits that we as VSOs engage with and provide. Now I can take any additional questions over here.
Really quick. Can we get a copy of your slides?
So I can answer that. Yes, for anybody wondering, at the end of this conference, we will have hyperlinks, and for all of those who have registered will receive an email that has all the slide presentations to include the recordings that were just done that will be available to the public. So all of the slides and the information will be available to everyone. Who else? Okay, go ahead and do that.
I heard a comment earlier about funding on the state side, federal side for more veteran service officers for the counties. Is that something that's happening right now?
That's not something that I can directly speak to or that I can directly put in. Certainly not from the VA standpoint. Steve's already.
I already know where this is going.
I was just kind of buying him time.
I'll be happy to tackle that one. So, who pays for veteran service officers? Maybe that's the question, right?
Taxpayers.
Mostly, yeah. So one thing that's important to know is that the federal VA does not pay for veteran service officers. There's no money coming down from the federal level, grants or contracts to nonprofits or states to pay for being a VSO. Now, the VA makes in-kind resources available to VSOs. They give VSOs free office space in VA facilities, medical centers, clinics, VA regional offices. They give them training. They give them access to information systems like the Veterans Benefits Management System. The VA itself knows that VSOs are important and valuable to this work, and they provide in-kind resources to help those organizations be successful in employing the VSOs. The VA doesn't make any grant dollars available, so how are VSOs paid? A lot of it is taxpayer money. There's some state dollars that fund VSO work with the nonprofit veteran service organizations and some of our county governments. The counties themselves have the option. There's no mandate, by the way, either at the national, the state, or the local level. There's no mandate for state or county governments to do this work, but they see the return on investment. They see the impact on the quality of life and the financial security that these benefits provide, access to health care. So many counties have decided to invest local dollars in this work, from the county veterans assistance funds or just county general fund revenue. Some states have other ways of doing it. They might have Oregon has like a veterans lottery where their lottery commission has a special lottery to raise money for veterans to help pay for service officer work. Indian tribes is similar. Many Indian tribes invest their own local dollars in tribal veteran service officers, tribal veterans programs. Sometimes the states can make grants to counties or nonprofits. It's sort of all of the above, but the important thing, the starting point there is that the feds don't pay for this work. It's our states, it's our county, it's our Indian tribes, it's local taxpayer money that are funding this. The state does invest in nonprofit veteran service organizations. We do have contracts with 5 different nonprofit veteran service organizations. We also invest in county veteran service officers. We have 6 counties that receive state funds. By the way, that's 6 counties out of 39. But there are actually 23 counties that are already doing this work. So those other 18 counties, they're putting their money where their mouth is. Like they realize the value of this work, and they're using local taxpayer dollars to help fund this. If you go back in Washington State, like history lesson here, in 2011, 2012, there were 0 county veteran service officers in our state. The nonprofits are out there, they're doing good work, the American Legion, the VFW, the Disabled American Veterans, Vietnam Veterans of America, etc. They're out there doing good work, but there were no county service officers. And it really started around 2012, 2013, that some of our counties, in central and in rural parts of Washington said, we're looking around the nation, and we see that other states have county veteran service officers, and like, how do we do that? And they called us and asked us to sit down, and I was there, and we looked at the regulations, and we said, yeah, we have the authority as a state veteran agency under these federal regulations to provide veteran service officer accreditation and training to our county partners. And quite frankly, we have a responsibility to help you get it right. Like, we don't want you to have to figure this out on your own, because figuring out on your own might mean that something or someone falls between the cracks. So we started partnering. It was actually Okanagan County was the first one in the state, where the county funded the service officer, and WDVA, we provide the training, the accreditation, the quality assurance, the systems access, and the appeals representation, understanding that some of those claims are going to be denied and the veteran might want to appeal the claim. Well, we started doing that. The next thing you know, Chelan County is on board, and then we're adding counties. We're at 23 today. Well, it didn't take too long for momentum to gather for voters like yourselves to start talking to their state legislators and say, well, how come the state isn't investing in this? How come the state isn't helping some of these smaller counties that might not have the resources to pay for this? And the legislators listened. So in 2019, there was state legislation passed creating a veteran service officer pilot program. I call it County Veteran Service Officer Pilot Program, because the nonprofits were already out there doing their thing, and they were getting some money from us, but it added counties. A pilot program that gave us the ability to fund 2 counties, one in Eastern Washington, one in Western Washington, just to see how it goes. So after the first couple of years, we had some data. We could show the return on investment. Legislators liked what they heard, and they said, okay, we want to expand this pilot. We're going to give you money for 2 more counties. So we went to 4 counties. And a year and a half, 2 years later, they like what they heard, and they said, okay, now we're going to give you money for 6 counties. So today, 6 out of those 23 counties I mentioned are receiving state grant funds to help pay for that veteran service officer work. It's still in a pilot phase. The legislator is very likely going to introduce legislation in the future to expand that pilot, based off the data that we're giving back to the legislator to show that return on investment. It's important that document that return on investment. We all see the quality of life impact on veterans and their families. We all know the anecdotes in the stories. But legislators, they need to see the outcomes, the return on investment. They need to know that taxpayers are getting their money's worth. That's where we come in, because we're collecting that data and we're providing it back to the legislator in reports. And in fact, there's a report we're working right now where we're required to submit a legislative report on the outcomes of the Veteran Service Officer Pilot Program in order to, and make recommendations for the legislator to inform future legislation. So legislators are interested, that they're hearing the need for veteran service officers. They're looking around at other states and seeing ways to fund it and how it works. Even at the county level, local county elected officials, tribal elected officials, they're asking a lot of questions and they're beginning to understand this work a lot better. And that's a large part of what I do. So I'm really the one who works with elected officials at the county level, the state level, the tribal level, to talk about, okay, what's the regulatory environment? Like, what is a VSO? How does it work? Who pays for it? How do they get funded? How do they get trained? All of that. And then once elected officials understand that, they decide for themselves if that's a service they want to invest in and if there's any perhaps state grants that can help fund that. So that's a lot of what WDVA does behind the scenes in order to ensure that there's county and tribal and nonprofit service officers out there. We went from 0 county veteran service officers to 23, actually serving 28 counties, because some of our counties are serving their neighbors as well. And that's awesome work, right? That counties are working together and finding ways. In some cases, they're even sharing resources where 2 counties are pitching in to pay for 1 service officer that's, hitting multiple counties. So, I kind of joke with my bosses that, when we have 39 counties, I can retire. That will be my legacy. But you guys see how important this work is when it comes to the benefits. We didn't anticipate the PACT Act being passed a couple of years ago. We're glad that it did. Yes, it increased the demand for VSOs, but that's okay. The legislature did invest additional dollars in VSO services in 2022 so that we could hire some more VSOs, we could give some more money to the counties, we could give some more money to the nonprofits. But as you've seen, it hasn't always kept up with the demand, right? So from a big picture perspective, that's the systems, that's the political mechanisms, that's how VSOs are funded or not funded. And there has been legislation introduced in Congress, hasn't passed yet. There has been legislation introduced in Congress to create a rural county veteran service officer grant, where the feds would have grant money available to rural counties, and the state veteran agencies would be a pass-through. So the Washington Department of Veterans Affairs or Oregon or Idaho could get a grant and then pass that money through to rural counties in the state. So there has been legislation introduced, hasn't quite got traction yet. At the federal level, our representatives in Congress and the Senate are aware of this, and you better bet with the PACT Act having passed, folks are talking about it now more than ever. So anyway, that's a big picture. At this point, you guys know as much as I know, but I'm always happy to have more conversations on the issue and share background with you. Any other questions?
And we have 2 more questions. We still have quite a bit of time. But shameless plug, the next session in this very room is the County Veteran Service Program for 4 of our counties, both on the eastern and the western side of the mountain. So if you'd like to learn more about what some of the counties in the state are doing, that would be a great recommendation. And Robert loves hard questions. Thanks.
So I understand that all of the VA claims here, I don't know if it's Pacific Northwest, but all of them go to Janesville, Wisconsin. How big is that scope?
So it's actually they've shifted to a national work queue in the process. It used to be that and it wasn't necessarily they used to all go to Janesville so much as Janesville was the processing center and then they were distributed elsewhere. Now the VA has changed their process to a national work queue where it's not necessarily that a given claim is processed in a given location so much as that this particular task on the claim gets assigned to X region, X office, whatever. It's completed and worked its way through. And once there's no further action to be done, it's then sent back to Regional Office 499, the National Work Queue, which is well known among VSOs. It's a distinct location and status that is common in claims. They are revamping the system soon, I've been told. It's a whole process, but the shift was substantial and has definitely impacted and changed the way that claims are done. For the better overall, but for complicating factors in a number of different ways when it comes to interfacing with that as a VSO. But it's not like there's one giant center in Janesville where they have 1.5 billion raiders and they're just sitting away in cubicles. They shop that out all over the nation to various different centers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. With DOD in 2004, they went in and they had a collaboration between VHA and VBA on DD-214s. A lot of times when working with vets, they lost their war due to life circumstances. They don't have their DD-214 anymore. Why is it so difficult for veterans to go to either VHA or VBA? In fact, a lot of times we're referred to the National Archives that they have to wait 6 months just for their DD-214 when they could actually go to either organization.
So there's a number of different reasons and different complications for that. That said, when you're requesting something from the VA or the VBA directly, it becomes a Freedom of Information Act request, which takes a good deal of process. So it's not as though that's a simple thing, and that's only assuming that the VBA actually has it on record. They don't actually maintain records unless the veteran has initiated that process for starting a claim. So it's not as though the VBA just has all of these lying around and isn't utilizing them. So first of all, they may not have a record initiated if a veteran hasn't started a claim. Second, if they do have it and the veteran is requesting it from the VBA, then they have to go through the Freedom of Information Act, which is its own process. Outside of that, if they don't, they then need to go through the National Archives. That said, your veteran service officer probably has ways of getting you or assisting you in getting your DD-214. I highly recommend you reach out to them because more often than not, one way or another, we can either reach into military systems through the DPRAS system. We either had it granted to us previously via separation agreements if you're in Washington State. It's either in your VBMS file already, in which case we can provide it for you straight up. There's a number of different ways that, as veteran service officers, we can get that for you much, much, much faster rather than actually needing to submit those requests.
And to add to that, just not to confuse the issue, not every veteran record is digitized. So if somebody served in the 50s and 60s, as we are well aware, computer systems weren't as prevalent back then. So that is why there's a need to go to the U.S. National Archives to request that. And they're literally in boxes somewhere in the National Archives. So somebody has to physically go out there, look at your name and information that you provided, and dig through a box to find that particular record. And that does take time. And as you can imagine, there is a backlog. If there is an emergent leave, such as homelessness, or maybe if the person is suffering from a terminal condition, I would recommend getting with the service officers because there are ways to expedite that process as well. But I mean, again, it does take a while, yes, but I mean, literally they are in boxes somewhere in storage. And it gets a little time consuming to retrieve those documents.
Hi. Yeah, I realize it's a little bit off topic, but as you mentioned, it ties in with the toxic health screening. That's on the VHA side. Just from my personal experience, kind of what it's billed to be isn't how I see it playing out. Is there a point of contact or a specific reference, or I guess rather like a general, is there a position at the clinics that I could reach out to get more information on how that process is supposed to work?
I think you're going to have to talk to me a little bit more directly on that one. Okay. That's a bit more specific, particularly kind of what the issues you're running into or what kind of the specifics of that one are.
Sure, thanks.
We have another question up here after that.
So something I have veterans do when I get a DD-214 form that I request from the archives, take it to the courthouse.
Absolutely. Yes. Please, your veterans are absolutely able to put it on record with their county, with their local courthoch. That is fantastic. That's definitely something that I would recommend them doing.
I'm going to sit down for a second. So my question is more to the PACT Act list of presumptives. So list of presumptives and the hazardous substances. Is there any place that actually says, if you've been exposed to this is the condition the VA will recognize as?
Yeah, so if you, actually pretty directly, if you go, the question for those that weren't able to hear the beginning of it was, is there anywhere that if you go to, you can look up, if you have been exposed to this, what are you qualified for presumptively from the VA, is that correct?
No, what disability?
Yes.
So the actual health disability.
Yes.
If I have Parkinson's, can I attribute it to this on the list?
So from a VA standpoint, it's sort of the other way around. What they consider it is more, if you were exposed to this and have this current disability, there isn't really another way where you can go, I have this
what would I need to be exposed to in order to find that. That's not really how that works. What you could do is sort of go backwards and you know, look it up on the list of presumptives, but it's not really something you could, for instance, insert your current health conditions and have them generate something that says you could be presumptively covered if you were exposed to X, Y, and Z.
Hey, just a quick note on the Freedom of Information Act requests to get a DD-214. I had a nurse who served 60 years ago, and we weren't able to get National Archives returned nothing, VBA and VHA both returned, you're not a veteran. And I said, well, do you have like a graduation photo or something of like you and your unit? And she said, no, but I dropped out of community college after one semester, but they paid for my GI benefits. So even though we had previously put in a Freedom of Information Act request, when we resubmitted it and said, hey, she used the GI Bill in this quarter and this year, then they were able to find it. So when you do those FOIAs, make sure they're very specific and help them find what they're looking for.
Yes, when it comes down to a lot of those things, I mean, records requests are very specific. When you're requesting a record, or the Freedom of Information Act, when you're requesting somebody's records, you're requesting them sort through what they have. So if they don't have it, if for instance you're asking for a DD-214 and they don't have it, if you specify DD-214 and they don't have your DD-214 on file, it may not mean that it doesn't exist, but if they don't have it, they won't give it to you. Similarly, if you requested your DD-214 and they have other things that might verify your service, they're not going to give it to you because you requested your DD-214. It is important. As much as it makes me laugh, and as much as it's one of those things that you roll your eyes at and laugh, the sad truth of my life is that I am a bureaucrat that cares whether or not you filed your 1010 or your 1010D form, because it makes all the difference in the world between whether or not you get your health care or your CHAMP VA. It's the sad truth. So the specificity of these forms can really be very important, and how and when and where you put these things in is exactly why service officers exist, because it can make the difference between whether or not you suddenly are considered a veteran and eligible to all of these benefits, or whether or not you're not.
I have another question, but to add to that, I know Tucker has said it 100 times, but seeing a local veteran accredited service officer is always a powerful tool. For those of you who may or may not be aware, there was an actual fire at the National Archives. It affected military records from, I believe, 1912 to 1969. There are ways to recreate your military record. You can talk to your battle buddies, get statements, pictures. You can get a letter that was sent from Vietnam to your girlfriend, now your wife, and use that as proof of service. So there are ways to recreate things. As Tucker mentioned multiple times, talking to an accredited service officer who is an expert or who has the knowledge to help you through that process is absolutely imperative. Because, as we all know, we know enough to know when we need help, and navigating the VA processes can be cumbersome. That's why we have these volunteers in the service organizations, or the county employees, or your state service officers that work with Department of Veterans Affairs, or we partner with some of the counties that will assist you through that process.
I know you need to do things to recreate being there, but like I have a veteran, he went to Fort Sills, Oklahoma after he left from Fort Lewis, and he spent his whole time at Fort Sills, and now there's nothing there. So he had no place to write to say, how can I prove I was there, because there's nothing there. And we finally had to find one person who saw him in the service, and he wasn't going to tell because they were told at Fort Lewis, you can't talk to nobody while you're here. So for his entire living life, he wouldn't write a letter. So when he was dying, he finally wrote a letter and said, yes, I saw this man at Fort Lewis. We were there during the beginning of our service. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's dying now, and now he's finally, because that's what he was told in the military, don't say don't talk to anybody while you're there.
Absolutely.
So something that I would mention is, and I'm sorry to hear that that's what it took, because something that brings up is that there's a lot of misinformation
that goes on around veteran service benefits, around VSOs, around veterans, around all of this. And it's tragic, it's really difficult, it changes and impacts lives. One of the reasons why, not because I need job security, one of the reasons why I suggest that veterans go to VSOs is because we really, certainly within Washington, we do our absolute best to ensure that when we can give you an answer, it is correct. That when your VA doctor is telling you, oh, I can't write a nexus letter, we can tell you they are wrong. That is not the case. That when your battle buddy is concerned because they've been told, oh, they can't talk to somebody, we can tell them that that is not true. Because that can change somebody's life. Whether or not somebody is eligible for health care, whether or not they get those benefits, whether or not they have that support, changes somebody's life. I really hope that the more that we can and the more that you guys can educate yourselves and work with educated individuals, the more that we can make that happen and be that difference for them. Because nobody should have to be on their deathbed before they could provide that kind of statement. Steve did actually have a quick one, point he wanted to make about records, at which point after that we have a question.
So on the topic of DD-214s, missing DD-214s, a little bit of background. So after World War II, after the Korean War and after the Vietnam War, the state of Washington gave a war bonus to veterans who were from Washington State, whether they drafted or volunteered, didn't matter. If you came from Washington State, you served in one of those conflicts, when you came home, the state of Washington gave you a thank you check. You had to fill out an application and send it to the state government, attach your DD-214, but guess what? They kept copies of those. The state archives has the war bonus records from World War II, from Korean War and Vietnam War, and they're on the microfiche in the basement in Olympia. So every now and then we get a call from a veteran or a family member who says, hey, my loved one, served in Vietnam, and we can't find their DD-214, and we wrote the National Archives and it burnt up in the fire, and what do we do? Where are they from? Oh, they're from Wenatchee. Did they serve? It's from Vietnam. I told you that already. Well, let's get their date of birth and their information, and we'll go check the microfiche, and we find a lot of them that way. They're in the state archives. Case a couple of days for us to get a hard copy from the state archives, but keep that in mind. For your veterans and families that are from Washington, sometimes they don't even remember. Did you get the state war bonus? I'm like, man, I just got off plane from Vietnam. I didn't know which way was up. Well, we check the records anyway. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, no big deal. It takes us like 15 minutes to check those microfiche. So keep that in mind too, the state war bonus records. And Washington State wasn't the only state to do that. Other states in the nation, many had similar things. So ask them where they're from. Maybe their state had a war bonus. That's another resource that veteran service officers often will lean on as well. Okay.
Yeah, one right there.
Oh, you don't want me to ask this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So you keep on saying volunteers and the VSOs and the accrediteds. Okay, so I've been around for a while. Steve knows me. Okay, so I'm not going to make this too difficult, but this is the statement. You want everybody to keep on seeing their VSOs. Okay, so all we ask is the training. You want us to do quality control and everything else. We're out here helping everybody. We realize that we're not supposed to be filing claims, but make sure that the language is correct, because what the veterans or the military out there are hearing is, oh, you guys can't help us. Mm-hmm. And that's not what the truth is. We can help them, we just can't help them file a claim. We can guide them through their paperwork, but we're not filing the claims. I got another one for you too.
Absolutely.
So don't go there.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go anywhere, but I did want to mention that you're absolutely correct. And for those of you that aren't following the process or aren't certain what you're talking about, that's the difference between an accredited VSO and representative and a nonprofit certified veteran service officer. And what that is in various different organizations, they have different ways that they go about addressing that. Accreditation is very specific. It means that through the VA, you are legally able to accept and take power of attorney of somebody and an overarching organization. When you're a certified service officer, it means that you have gone through training with a given nonprofit organization, and they have essentially said, hey, you are now knowledgeable enough and have worked with veterans enough to help them through their claims. It doesn't mean that you can accept power of attorney for them, but it does mean that you have been through nonprofit organization training to work with veterans. And those certified service officers are an incredibly important part of this process. I don't want to undersell it. When I say that I want you to work with an accredited veteran service officer, it's not that I don't want you to be working with the nonprofit organization that you have engaged with or that you have an excellent relationship with. It's that I want you to know that that is part of this process. Those certified service officers do then work with accredited service officers and accredited organizations that then go on to take power of attorney and represent you as a veteran in your claims. That's why we provide funding for the nonprofit organizations. So that I hope that that addresses what you're talking about.
Okay, but the other question is, how do they get certified again? To get now, because it's all changed now. I'm not blaming you, Steve.
So, so I mean, from a nonprofit standpoint, from a certification standpoint, that's between the nonprofits, because a certified veteran service officer is only certified by their nonprofit organization, and that's the caveat there. Is that because it's not an accredited veteran service officer, that certification is only saying as much as the organization is saying that it is. So ensure that your organization and the organization that you're working with, if you have questions or if you want to make sure that that training is there, ask. Ask your local chapter post, ask your local commander, reach out. Ask what they're doing for that training and when they attended that training and what that training was and entails.
Okay, there's one more in the back who had one.
There's another one over.
It was just real quick with the DD24 or the war bonus with the state. How do we get that from you?
You can follow up with me directly. That's just something. That's an email.
There's my card. Give me a call because that microfiche is right next to my office. And it's really fun to show kids what microfiche looks like.
Yeah, nice.
So my question is about the Nexus letter that you mentioned in the slide. I work with some veterans that will come back to me and say, I go to the VA for my care, but my doctor says, I'm not gonna write a Nexus letter. I said, oh, well, then we'll find another doctor. Because if they know the care of that veteran or they know their disabilities or their symptoms, they have a fiduciary duty, I would think, to write a letter or fill out the form, whatever it would be. What do you do in that case?
There's a couple different options. It is a very difficult situation. There are times where a VA doctor will not write a letter because they legitimately can say, unfortunately, this isn't service connected. Those are relatively few and far between for what we're talking about in these purposes. Many times they are confused. They don't know that they are not allowed, that they are allowed to do so. And there is a common misunderstanding and belief in the VHA that those doctors cannot provide that, and that is false. VHA doctors can and do write Nexus letters for the veterans that they see, and you can advocate for that, and you can tell your veterans that is the case, and you can direct them to their VA advocates who can say as much and can address that as much. Something that the state is trying to do and the county veteran service officers are trying to do with their local healthcare organizations and their local healthcare centers is reaching out and trying to do that informing of those doctors, saying, hey, please know that this is the case, and please be aware that when veterans come to you asking for these Nexus letters and these connection statements, A, you are able to provide them, B, it is important that you provide them, and C, you do need to provide them in a way that can be uploaded and visible and made visible in their files, because oftentimes it's not simply sufficient to tell the veteran that. So that's part of something that we do as advocates, but something that from your perspective, you can also direct them to both the VA advocates, who can say as much directly within the system, and you can inform your veteran, letting them know, hey, it is not a policy that says you cannot write this. if they are pushing back, you can help your veteran know that.
Steve reminded me of an idea I had to try to find records. If you have VBMS access, you can submit I want to get VBMS access for this vet. Even if they say I've never had any interaction with the VA ever in my entire life, at some point they might have had some interaction with the VA and their DD-214 might be in the system. Even if they don't remember having ever interacted with the VA, they might have. Just go back all the way in those VA records, and a lot of the time that DD-214 might be there from 1979 or whatever, and just go backwards in there. Even if they say I've never had it, it's worth just going to check, and just, even if the VA says we don't have it, too.
Absolutely.
The
Service
VA often
officers.
doesn't look at their own records.
Service officers, service officers, service officers, people that have the availability to do that kind of thing in the system, we absolutely will run through and check. That is why we're here.
Yeah, all right, ladies. So we are about 4 minutes from time, so we have enough time for one question.
Everybody said, make it good.
The answer's 6.
In regards to the policy that VA can't write nexus letters, I have recently, what?
Can. They can.
Okay. I've recently had a provider, a VA care provider, primary provider, say that his VAMC will not let him do this. He used to do them, but they told him not to.
That is against policy.
I agree with that.
And what I can tell you is that when that is the case, we can reach out to the VA regional offices, and that would be something that I would say get in contact with me about, so that we can engage with our partners in our partnership and correct that imbalance. Because that is
It's Walla
incorrect.
Walla, just in case you're curious.
Thanks for putting it on blast.
It's recorded.
Yeah.
Point being, that is something that we can work to correct and work to address, and that is why we partner with the VA and VHA directly. Thank you guys so much for your time and for engaging directly. I think
Just in closing, again, all the slides will be available after the conference is over, once we get them all uploaded. Again, great job, Tucker. We probably owe you an adult beverage for stepping in. And if you have any further questions, we do have staff available that could help. Just let us know.